podcast, Preventing Operator Assaults, is a helpful look at the problem of conflict in and on our community transit systems. We hope that by starting a discussion that includes practical tips and ideas, that we can keep transit operators safe in every community, whether they serve in an urban, rural, or tribal transit environment. This project is funded by a grant from the Federal Transit Administration to improve safety for professional bus drivers and public transit riders throughout the nation. Your host is best-selling author and Transit Unplugged podcast host, Paul Comfort.
We're now in part 2 of this interview with Charlotte DiBartolomeo, who heads up the Red Kite Project. Kristen Joyner, my co-host. Kristen, how would we like to start the conversation today from picking up from the previous podcast interview?
Yes, thank you, Charlotte, for being here. Charlotte DiBartolomeo is the founder and CEO of Red Kite Project, a resilience-building firm working in both the transit and medical industry to mitigate the impact of trauma and burnout on their workforce. She earned her master's in conflict transformation from the School for International Training Graduate Institute. She studied post-conflict reconstruction in Bosnia and Croatia. Charlotte has trained both management and frontline employees in conflict de-escalation, crisis management, and employee engagement in the transit industry for 10 years. In addition, Charlotte is on staff at Drexel University in Philadelphia, where she developed and teaches a course in trauma-informed care. You said a couple of interesting things, Charlotte, on our last episode. You talked about transit drivers as human service professionals. I think that a person typically doesn't come in and think of themselves that way. You also talked about needing to think about what happened to that person and empathy. Could you catch us up just a little bit about that? Talk about empathy and understanding.
Absolutely. Well, I think often when someone begins the career of a bus operator, they come in and they recognize that they have to be a safe driver and really proficient at that, and that they're also a customer service representative. But if we can help them change that identity to a human service professional, they're less likely to see this as a transaction of, I'm getting money to do this service for you. And so we see that human service professionals have to have a lot of empathy because they're walking into a social service profession where some of the people are not really in the best shape, that they need help, they need assistance. And that may be people who are experiencing a physical illness or a mental illness. And so to have empathy for that is really going to make a difference in that interaction. Oftentimes people who are really living on the margins, they're very good at reading faces. They're very good at seeing whether or not someone is concerned about them or finds them to be disgusting. And sometimes our faces betray our disgust, and it gives the impression that, this person that's getting on my vehicle is really gross. So we work on all of these things about, your body language, the way you are with people, but also what's happening for you. Are you triggered by these folks? Is this bringing up something for you that, an experience you had a while ago with someone in this case? So for instance, with mental illness, a lot of times comes opiate addiction. And we know that there is this horrendous thing that's happening across the country with opiate addiction, and it's touched nearly every family. As I sit in circle with people, I hear this. And so a lot of times when you as an operator are watching people in active addiction, that can create a lot of triggering experiences for you. And so trying to maintain some empathy and some control, and not too much so that you're getting caught up in it, but really finding where the boundaries are and how to interact, we find is really important.
Charlotte, could you talk to us about the multi-layered response required to keep drivers safe before, during, and after a ride?
Well, so as I mentioned in the last podcast, we believe that this has to be a system-wide approach. And why that's important is because no matter what we teach in the training room, if an operator or a cashier doesn't believe anybody has their back, they will take matters into their own hands. And of course, there are times when you as an operator are just wrong place, wrong time. Absolutely happens. But if you also feel like, there's nobody coming for me, there's a camera on me, but they're just going to look to see what trouble I'm getting myself into. It can create a really threatening experience for them. And when people are under threat, the professional is under threat, then they feel like, well, I have to protect myself. That's just simply a human response when we're under threat. So to be able to communicate support during and after an experience is crucial to be able to retain people in this industry. So for instance, someone gets on the vehicle, they are harassing and threatening the operator. They call dispatch. Dispatch needs to have an understanding. Of course, dispatch is trying to find out, okay, where are you? What's happening? And it can be very clipped, right? Very, very quick. But there also has to be an element of empathy here. Otherwise, the operator is getting the message that I'm just a number. They don't really care about me. Then after the experience happens, if the first thing someone says is, can you drive? Can you keep going? Please keep going. Or what did you do? What did you do wrong? That sends a terrible message that, so you think this is my fault? But if you ask, okay, are you okay? What can I do for you? Your safety is our greatest concern. And then back that up with action. That really creates a different communication and a different response time for the operator to get back to work. We find that operators who have not had that important piece at the end will take longer to return to work. So there's that part in the system. But then, of course, there's also all of the partnering that we need to do with other agencies. And that becomes something that, you have to then have liaisons from the agency to reach out to the social services networks to find out what other agencies are doing, to maybe share some resources. Those are the kinds of things I think that can create a stronger support system.
I love that you have demonstrated in this. It's not just empathy towards the riders that may be having a mental health episode, but it's also a team approach, an internal community approach between those in dispatch, those out in the field. I'm sure this goes into empathy between supervisors and drivers, and then really upper management needs to take probably some empathy training as well. What would you think about that?
I do think that's true. I think that the upper management oftentimes looks at the situation and they have to get their needs met as well. They're dealing with local government. They're looking at the numbers. They're seeing that they can't keep all the routes going. There's so many things that they have going on. And my experience with executive leadership, and I'm sure yours too, Kristen, is that people do care, but they sometimes don't know how to show that because they're so busy. There are so many things happening. There's burnout that's happening at all ends of the spectrum in this transit industry, right? So that's a piece that we have to do. So we need to also figure out how to get their needs met so that they can be more empathetic. And that is a really hard thing. We all have to support one another here.
That's a great way to bring it full circle, Charlotte, that everyone involved needs to be involved in the training process and involved in a cohesive response, as Kristen said, the kind of the community inside the agency. This has been a great two-part look into preventing driver assaults. Thank you so much for the training you're doing for our industry and for being our guest today. Charlotte DiBartolomeo, head of the Red Kite Project, Kristen Joyner, our co-host and the sponsor of this great series. I'm Paul Comfort, host of the Transit Unplugged podcast. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for the next training episode on the special series, Preventing Driver Assaults. Stay safe out there.
All comments, tips, and ideas are the express opinion of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Transit Unplugged, the Federal Transit Administration, CTAA, SWTA, TTI, or their subsidiaries. Thanks for listening.